What's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast presented to you by Texas Pete. I'm Connor O'Gara. Will, did you successfully not overreact to the early signing period?
Man, people were telling me that Brian Kelly didn't want to recruit because he wanted to play golf. LSU had 27 signees. They signed all 27 of them by 1 p.m. If Brian Kelly wanted to have a 2 p.m. tea time, more power to him. You know what? The most chill early signing day of my life. Nobody flipped on signing day. All this hay was in the barn. It was the most chill, relaxing experience. I got to laugh at other teams, have their recruiting classes come apart, and specifically Colorado did that weird thing. I heard somewhere that Maryland has a guy that they tell to go undercover every year. That's kind of a piece of crap move. But yeah, all the weird flips on signing day just didn't affect us.
Maryland quietly has one of the weirder recruiting underbellies that you'll see in this sport. And I always feel like Maryland throws some weird hijinks there at the final 11th hour. We're not going to talk about Maryland recruiting, I promise. Don't turn this podcast off thinking that that's what we're going to talk about today. It's definitely not. We're going to have Brett Merriman join us in a bit to talk about his proposal to fix college football. He's going to talk some Lane, some Ole Miss stuff as well. I also got a Christmas reading that we're going to close with. Definitely stick around for that. We're not going to talk Maryland recruiting today, but there, I think, are a lot of different ways that you could have looked at signing day depending on which fan base you were in. But if you were a Florida fan, I think you probably let out a sigh of relief by the end of the day. Just a little sigh of relief. I want to talk about DJ Lagway because I think he's in a really unprecedented spot. And if everything that we saw happen on signing day and all the different things that happened where, we've got coaches not complaining about NIL, all those different things, this I think is still, for my money, the most interesting. And it's something that we're going to talk about moving forward. But what DJ Lagway just signed up for at Florida is unprecedented in a lot of different ways. Florida signing period, like the early signing period, pretty noteworthy developments. I think it was difficult if you are on the outside or on the inside not to overreact, even though I told you, just don't. Either way, just don't do it. Not worth your time. But a class that was once as high as number 3 in the country in the second week of November has since lost 8 players that are considered blue chip recruits by 24/7 Sports, at least in the composite rankings. They had the 5-star defensive lineman McCray. He delayed his announcement, which made things that much worse. He ends up still signing with Florida. But by the time that late afternoon DJ Lagway ceremony was happening, you're like, is this all going to just be falling apart for Billy? Is that what we're witnessing right now? Mm-hmm. Because I think at different points of the day, it definitely felt like that. And then Lagway's ceremony, it doesn't feature any drama. It's all Florida stuff there. He signs, as I said, in addition to McCray, your 5-star guys there. And a sigh of relief. That I think is how Florida fans deserve to feel at the end of that day, despite the fact that some of the other things you could point to would say, yep, the sky is falling. Recruits definitely noticed that it didn't really end very well for the 2023 regular season. From what I was told, Lincoln Riley, Dabo, they were begging DJ Lagway at the 11th hour to get him to flip. A&M did its best, but he ends up sticking with Florida amidst all the noise about Billy's future and the class that is losing pieces left and right. Maybe in part he stays with Florida because of that uncertainty. As weird as that sounds, I think after the Rashada deal last year, the way all that played out, there was this feeling that if Lagway flipped, that all hope would be lost. And any sort of path for Billy to survive this, for Florida to get through this, would be gone. And I'm not saying that Lagway sticking with Florida means that all hope is back, but I just feel like it is such a unique situation that is worth digging into right now, not as they are about to enter in the season, but because of the thought process behind it for all parties, really. Mm-hmm. So Lagway being billed as Florida's path out of this rut. It is fair in some ways, unfair in many other ways. I think he's fully aware of that, Will. If you've seen some of his comments, it feels like this guy is understanding of the situation he's walking into. It's one thing to commit to a coach in year one that's in the midst of a rebuild and you say that you want to be part of the future, some sort of like Christian Hackenberg thing at Penn State. But for an out-of-state kid, the Max Preps Player of the Year in the entire country, to take on something like this when there were unlimited options for him, unlimited options with money attached to those options as well, in ways that they probably were in years past before NIL became a thing, but in more obvious ways where the money was definitely there, and he stays with Florida. There are a
real
lot
quick,
of
and talking about like Hackenberg, it's like it would have been such an easy fit if he wanted to go that way to just go to A&M, because Elko's at least lasting worst case 2 years, right? Probably likely 3. Even if he's mid, he'll probably get. I mean, Jimbo lasted that long. You know what I'm saying? So he could have easily stayed home, taken. You never know with A&M and money. We're going to assume more money, right? Because it's A&M, and just been like, I'll take whatever stability this is versus I'm going to bet on myself. And I love that move for him. And I think that's super cool to honor your pledge and be like, hey, kind of the easy way is down the street because the expectations are so low. There's no hot seat. You're totally right.
He definitely made himself more fans among the Florida faithful for going through that process, and not even having the drama filled signing day too, of having just Florida banner with the blue and orange balloons sitting right there. I mean, that was what Florida fans could have hoped for in this spot, when everybody on the outside is saying, hey, he's going to do this, he's going to do this, and he ends up not, and it wasn't filled with anything like that when that path was obviously there. We know that Graham Mertz is going to be the starter. At least that is the assumption, right? From what I have been told, the package is already there for Lagway, and there's 2 more packages on the way. That's the vision that this coaching staff has for him as a true freshman in this offense. They're going to give him legitimate opportunities to throw the football downfield, and they have to do that at a higher rate next year. They just do, especially against that schedule. You're going to need some home run plays. You're not going to methodically drive the football down the field the way that Billy has traditionally liked to. The usage of these 2 quarterbacks, it's not going to be early season Auburn with Thorne and Ashford. It's not going to be that, okay?
It's like a way upgraded version of that, I guess. It's like giga both.
Yeah, like, and some are saying, well, both Thorne and Mertz are Big Ten transfers and kind of guys that have been written off, and you got the exciting younger piece that's going to have to figure things out. I think as a thrower, Lagway is already ahead of where Ashford is at, and I don't slight the kid. I think
probably ahead of Thorne too, honestly. Like, yeah,
could be, definitely could be. We'll wait and see on that, but I think this is going to end up looking a little bit more like how Mullen used Trask and Emory Jones when Emory Jones was an underclassman, and that rotation actually, while it was kind of frustrating at times to see Trask cooking and then all of a sudden, oh, you got to bring Emory Jones in, you kind of understood what he was doing there. Florida's ideal world, and again, this is their ideal world, is that this turns into a 2023 version of Leak and Tebow. I know. Yeah, that's the ideal version of this thing. Of course it is. I personally think that all teams should try and mimic formulas that won national championships. That's just me. I don't know. Maybe I'm in the minority with that, but sign me up. That sounds great. It'll be way easier said than done, despite the fact that Netflix tried to tell us that Chris Leak sucked and that he was much worse than Graham Mertz. It's still going to be difficult, even if you think, well, Lagway's coming in as a more highly regarded recruit, or at least higher rated than Tebow was. Tebow was probably still just as highly regarded and billed as the savior of the future, all those different things. But it's just far from a guarantee that Lagway steps in and plays a role quite as pivotal as the one that Tebow played on that 06 Florida team.
Yeah, I think the difference too, like the 2 guys we're talking about, Ashford and Tebow, had a built-in like mobility factor. Whereas like I don't want to sell Lagway as some like, oh, athlete playing quarterback. Like he is a throwing quarterback. Like he is a dude with a gun. He throws darts. He is, athletic enough to keep the play alive, but he's always looking to throw first. So getting that guy reps is often a little bit harder because when you have Tim Tebow, he's just kind of a dump truck back there. You're just like, get in and get a yard. If you have Ashford, it's like, let's run a little RPO. With Lagway, to your point, it's like he can already throw a better deep ball probably than Mertz. So we know we can get that. But how they use him and how they incorporate him is going to be much more interesting than just, let's let the kid run around. Because that's using him wrong if you use him as a running quarterback, in my opinion.
If it's 3rd and 12, are you saying bring in the true freshman? Mm-hmm. He's the guy that we want in this spot. If we want something downfield like this, he's the guy that we bring in this spot. I don't know that you're going to be able to do that every time, but can you do it sometimes? Can you do it to mix things up a little bit? Perhaps they will. And I'm not one to root for two quarterback systems. I do want to see DJ Lagway play. I really do. And obviously Florida fans do as well. The other obvious, very obvious difference between what Florida is trying to do in 2023 and what they did in 2006. The pieces, the circumstances around them, a little different. Just a little bit. Urban was in year 2. I think we forget a little bit kind of the uncertainty of Urban in year 1 and what was being said about him. But still, he was in year 2, had plenty of patience. Leak was, again, not what Netflix tried to tell us. He was a proven guy. And while I wouldn't sit here and tell you that he was an ideal fit in Urban's system, he knew that this was a spot where he could still thrive. And Urban was in a spot as a coach where he could tinker. And Florida was able to kind of mess around with that, at least at first, because they're loaded at the skill positions. And even at their worst during that period, during the early 2000s, Florida was still cranking out defenses that were in the top 4th in the country in scoring. Yep. And that year was expected to be a really, really good Florida defense. So this situation is not that, okay? That's not what I'm sitting here trying to say. I don't know that there is any situation that DJ Lagway is experiencing that I feel like is a perfect comp for. There's really not. And we've seen plenty of quarterbacks in college football be tabbed as the savior of a program upon arrival, and they're tasked with either bringing a dormant program back to life or saving a coach's job. Like Joe Burrow, LSU 2018, daunting schedule. That's an obvious one that comes to mind. But Burrow had spent 3 years in college at Ohio State. He had been in a strength program. All of that film study was obvious. It was even obvious during his time at Ohio State. If you watched how the game slowed down for him that spring, I really thought he took a next step and was ready to be a Power 5 starter, and that was pretty obvious. So that comp doesn't really work because we're talking about a guy who, as he says, I went to school at Ohio State. I played football at LSU. Little different.
10 years younger than Joe Burrow, too.
10, wait.
I'm just kidding. That was a joke. No, Burrow was like 24, 25 in college. I was just giving him like the Stetson Bennett joke. Yeah.
Well, with the COVID year, you just never know.
You never know. That's days. A good point. Yeah.
I was sitting there doing the math. I'm like, wait a minute. That can't be possible. No, okay. Not possible. Yeah. 2019 Bo Nix is an interesting comp for Lagway. Interesting, I'll say. Nix was the 5-star guy who got to play immediately. All the family pressure, very well documented. And I mean, let's be honest, Gus is always on the hot seat. Basically, any year after 2015, it's like, yeah, Gus is on the hot seat. That's just kind of the way that it was for him. The difference between that situation and this one is just like we talked about with 06 Florida, the surroundings. Even though the final year of Jarrett Stidham was disappointing in 2018, Auburn was preseason number 16 in the country heading into Bo Nix's freshman year in 2019. That defense was loaded, loaded. Derek Brown, Marlon Davidson, Roger McCreary. I went back and counted 9 NFL players on that defense, 5 of whom were eventually drafted in the first 2 rounds. That Auburn defense with Kevin Steele needs to get more credit. It was awesome.
Yep.
It was really good.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about Gus is that like as he's now at UCF, I'm starting to realize that we were kind of fundamentally, I'm not talking about you, just like as fans, we were fundamentally wrong about him, which is that he was actually kind of a defensive coach. Like if you looked at what you were scared of when you played Auburn, yeah, you could talk about Nick Marshall, Bo Nix, all these guys. But they always had a terrifying defense. They always had like the big dudes. They always had the good DBs. And that's what kept his coaching tenure going, was the fact that the defense was always at least solid. And the offense was a fun experiment they always joked about. But that defense in 19 was, I mean, they limited Joe Burrow, our boy, to his worst game of that year.
And if you think about it too, the basic premise of the Gus defense, or the Gus offense rather, doesn't exactly lend itself to complementary football. And that's what they ended up having year over year. So
yep.
For Nix, I remember Cole coming onto this show saying the reason Gus opted for Bo instead of a veteran like the great, wonderful Hall of Fame, some are saying is worthy, Malik Willis, or going to someone like Cord Sandberg. The reason that Gus was able to go with Bo and say, hey, I'm just going to put a true freshman out there week 1, the surrounding pieces. He could take his licks early and figure things out while they were playing in some of these low-scoring games. And you would just trust the defense to be able to get enough stops, and then the hope would be eventually by the end of the season, you can go out and win a shootout for you. and kind of played out that way. Even though Auburn didn't end up playing in a college football playoff or anything like that, or playing for an SEC championship, they still beat Bama that year, and they still did some really good things as a result of playing that defense. But that in itself is different from this Florida situation. Okay.
Yep.
It just is. Unless Graham Mertz suffers preseason injury, gets hurt week 1, week 2, I don't know, like a Jacob Eason type injury, something like that. Like Florida won't be turning to Lagway as the September starter. And if he does step into that role later in the season, remember, Florida's last 5 games, as daunting as we have ever seen in the history of the sport, there is no margin for error for a first-time starter, a true freshman, no matter how talented, in that spot. So how does Billy approach that? I don't know. How do you walk that line of knowing that you need to win football games while also showing people in charge that the future is bright and that they should be patient and that they should let Lagway develop? Because, yeah, like in Florida's ideal world, the way this thing works out is Graham Mertz takes another step. Lagway plays well in relief, and Florida goes 8-4, and Billy is allowed to stick to his plan, right? That's this working. That is this thing being better than what we're going to be talking about in the preseason for Florida. That world might not exist. It just might not, okay? I don't know that it does. There's certainly not enough to assume that that's on the horizon. I think we can agree on that at this point, at least. We don't even know who's going to be calling plays yet. Okay, we really don't know.
We have a good
not
idea.
Officially. I'd love to see what those odds are at this point. Billy's got to be minus 300, maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know. Minus NFL coordinator. Maybe he is waiting.
Oh no, all the good OCs have been hired. Guess I gotta go call plays again. Hate that. Oh well.
Oh darn. The guy that we wanted is gone. Tried to get Ben Johnson from the NFL, but he wasn't going to leave the Detroit Lions unless he was given $15 million to become a head coach somewhere. Yeah, look, I think that this is a really, really difficult spot for us on the outside to look at this and see that path to stardom for Lagway, or for him to give enough to Florida, those decision makers to say, we need to stay with Billy because we need to see this Lagway thing through. Okay.
Right.
At the same time, this is going to sound weird, and I want you to brace for this. But is it possible that Billy is sticking with an OC, with himself as the OC, and that he said to Lagway, look, I can tell you the exact type of offense we're going to run. I'm going to be the one running it. And maybe that appealed to him. Maybe. Okay. It's possible. What really can't be questioned at this point, DJ Lagway has blind faith in his head coach. Very much, we'll call it borderline blind faith in his head coach. I will question if he can do something that we've never seen before. I went back and looked at all the 5-star quarterback recruits of the playoff era to try and find if there's just any other example like Lagway signing with a team in I don't want to say endless cycle, but in a cycle of consecutive losing seasons with a coach that's on everyone's hot seat list.
Oh, so you were looking at Zillow.com.
More or less.
You were looking at some dudes that changed area codes, a mobile fellows.
Yeah. Like there's not a ton of 5-star quarterbacks. This was not the deep dive that I did the other day. So this didn't take me, an afternoon and a morning combined. But, it takes a little bit of time to figure this out. And I think it's worth sticking to the 5-star part of this, because you can get into this blue chip quarterback recruit was billed as the savior. Once upon a time, Harrison Bailey was the savior of Tennessee football. All right. Like being a 5-star guy, it's different. It's different at the quarterback position. It just is. So like you could say, what about Will Grier? He was kind of in that spot. Not a 5-star guy though, top 50 overall recruit. He signed in that 2014 class at Florida, Muschamps last year. But I just think the buildup for Lagway will be different, even bigger than it was for Will Grier. So the other situation.
I'll say this real quick before you get into 5 stars, because that's a good It's a good question. I've been thinking about since you asked it. What's the most similar situation? And I do think, I think the answer is staring me right in the face. And I know he's not a 5-star, but I mean, it's Anthony Richardson. That is a guy that came in. He was the number one like hopium guy. He's from Gainesville. You know what I'm saying? The fan base from day one was like, we got, I don't think from day one they were saying let's bench Emory Jones. And I've said this. I really don't even think Mullen didn't like when you think about how he played him against LSU and Georgia. I think he kind of did it at the worst time, but almost too early. Like it was anyway, not going to get into that. We've done that a billion times, but I think that's as close as you're going to see, which is a coach that's on the way out, a quarterback that is his last grasp of like, okay, if this guy plays well, like the fans want to see him, let's throw him out there, get the fans to cheer, get them off my back. And obviously Mullen was kind of a jerk, so he managed it poorly. But yeah, I think that style of management is not the worst case, but not a good case for sure.
Two things that are different.
Okay.
One is that the time Anthony Richardson signed with Florida, he's a 4-star guy, but was he even a top 200 recruit? I don't think he was. I don't think he was. He was still billed as extremely raw. And even CD, good old Chris Doring, who was as big of an Anthony Richardson fan as a recruit as anybody that I talked to, even he was like, yeah, I mean, he's special, but he's got things that he's going to work through and he's going to have to figure those things out. He was not in that spot as a true freshman. He was in that spot during his redshirt freshman year, his second season at Florida in 2021, when it was like, okay, then that became the narrative kind of in season. And it became, oh my God, this guy is so good. You can't keep him off the field. He could be the savior. We need to see what we have in him. So yeah, at this juncture, it's different. It eventually got to a place that's kind of similar, I would say.
Yep. With the USF game. But that was like week 2 or 3 where it was like they knew from the time they saw him, we all knew that's something right there. We don't know what it is. And he never really did figure it out at Florida, right? But in the NFL, he was something until he got hurt.
Yeah, I mean, that's TBD on whether or not that works. It's still such a small sample size with him just overall as a football player. So it's gonna be tough to judge. But that's okay. That makes a little bit more sense when you kind of map out some of the stuff that eventually unfolded by the time that he was on campus, by the time that he was in year 2. But in terms of like a guy that's stepping into that, Sam Heward at Washington, 5-star quarterback. It's actually on the surface, it might look good, but then the situation that you just brought up with Richardson, it developed into that. This one could not have been any further like removed from happening. Okay. Like when Heward was at Washington, he came in as, the legacy guy, his uncle was there, his dad was there. They were both quarterbacks for Washington in the 90s. Brock Heward, of course, who's all over football media in general right now. But Jimmy Lake also wasn't on the hot seat before 2021. And that's probably a key difference. Like that he showed up on campus and then they fell apart. They were actually like 3-1 during the COVID shortened season. So it really wasn't, and that was in his first season. So it was a different set of circumstances. Heward now is at Cal Poly, I want to say. At least that's where he transferred.
Really?
Yeah.
Funny enough, that was the first example I thought of, but I was like, I don't know enough to just open my gums about this. I'm glad you kept up, because I remember he was kind of an uncharacteristic 5-star, and then you figured out the family connection. Well, the family connection was obvious because the name's a little bit weird, but I'm glad you kept up, because that was one of my first thoughts. Was like, I wonder what happened to that guy, Cal Poly or whatever. There you go.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the ins and outs of. I don't have any sort of boots on the ground knowledge of what exactly went wrong there, why the guy didn't live up to it, but. There's a reason why they went after Michael Penix Jr. in the transfer portal. And there's a reason why Heward last year was sitting there in a weird spot, I think post spring. And I remember even talking about Florida, would they go after somebody like him? And he was sitting there in the portal and no Power 5 teams were biting. That's kind of telling. That seems really telling. So that situation, not exactly an exact comp. Maybe this is the best one. JJ McCarthy, 2021.
Okay.
5-star at Michigan, had to endure the Harbaugh rumors, which remember when the time he's signing in December of 2020, right? He's class.
Which ones, Connor? Which Harbaugh rumors this time are we talking about?
2020 was, oh my God, he's falling apart. You got to fire this guy. It was expected that Michigan was going to be done with him, not Harbaugh was going to be done with Michigan. So that was very much a coach on the hot seat entering 2021. He was all over those hot seat lists. And then Michigan wins the Big Ten, goes to the playoff that year. McCarthy was the future. McNamara was always the starter, but McCarthy did get in the impression of the situation changed when Michigan got off to that great start. Suddenly it was, oh my God, is Michigan about to win the Big Ten? They go 7-0 into that Michigan State game and they end up blowing a lead in that one. But that was one that I kind of thought of. And that defense was so nasty with Hutchinson too that year. So I don't really know that that's a fair one. But what are your thoughts on that? Because that was one I kind of was like, maybe I overlooked that.
Honestly, yeah, great call. Like I'm kidding, but I'm not about the Harbaugh rumors because it was okay. Is he cheating? Is he leaving for the NFL? Are they done with him? Is he done with him? Is he cheating again? So yeah, it's actually really good to zero in and say, yeah. I mean, they were kind of going through some funky stuff back then, and Harbaugh's a guy that kind of like Brian Kelly in a way where when things are going well, it's like we love this guy, and when they're going terribly, everybody turns immediately, and it's good to remember how bad it was then because a season or two of a half of Jim Harbaugh struggling, and suddenly everyone's like, I hate this guy, he's a jerk. So yeah, it was very close to the precipice, and you're right, that was a little bit of hopium. Like you said, McNamara played well enough to where it was like, we're going to leave this guy in. They didn't need to go to him, but we'll never know, if he hadn't, what would have happened.
Yeah, I think that situation probably the closest of any 5-star that I can think of, just in terms of proud program, high expectations, coach on the hot seat. I think McCarthy was rated higher than any quarterback in the Harbaugh era that signed with Michigan too, which that's definitely part of it. And when they lost to Georgia in the playoff, the silver lining for Michigan fans was, okay, well, this is going to tell Harbaugh that you got to move on from Cade McNamara. This is when you're going to turn to JJ McCarthy. You have to have that 5-star guy in a spot like this. So maybe there is some of that there, but that only lasted for a certain amount of time. And again, the surroundings are just different. They just are. Yep. Michigan surroundings on that defense were still really good, even though they were bad in 2020, but they still had a lot of talent coming back and they were expected to be good. Everything that we look at with this Florida team, I think we have questions about. I do. Like, it's just questions all over the place. Trey Wilson might be really good. He might be awesome and worth the price of admission. Montreal Johnson, again, these might be all SEC type players. They very well could. They could have a couple of guys on defense like that too. Florida lost 2 of their best players to the portal, Manuel and Etienne, obviously. And it's hard to sit here and have faith in a defense that's been disappointing, not just last year, but last 4 years. Last 4 years, bad Florida defenses.
Yep.
Everything that Lagway does will be magnified because of that. And I think he knows it. I do. I think this is someone who understands his situation and is trying to let it fuel him to be a college-ready player from the jump. I don't know that every 5-star could say, I want to play immediately. I want to do this. I want to do that immediately. They don't always do the right things to be able to set themselves up for that kind of success and to show their head coach, this is why I deserve to play. And having that right mental makeup, it's just not a given. And I think so far, based on what we've seen from him, he has passed that test. I've said it a lot, but it's still not ideal if you're turning to a true freshman quarterback from the jump. And it probably says something about your quarterback room. Again, Florida is not expected to do that. And
wait, real quick, before I forget, I thought of a couple as you were saying that, because with the Michigan one, it made me realize that could have been Texas with Arch Manning, because we also had a similar podcast with him. But they obviously, Ewers plays amazing, wins Alabama. We never have a second thought. A guy that kind of fit that path, interestingly, Caleb Williams of Oklahoma. Because remember, they had Spencer Rattler. He was like the number 1 player in America, as good as Rattler was, and I'm not comparing Mertz and Rattler as recruits or whatever, but that was the hopium that Lincoln Riley was able to sell was, but look at Caleb Williams. But then he just stopped caring and stopped selling anything, when they lost to Oklahoma State or whatever. And so I think he was trying to pull that move with Caleb Williams, and then he eventually just checked out and was like, this isn't worth my time.
No, that one's different because Riley he's not on the hot seat. He's not on the hot seat, and Caleb Williams was preseason number 1 overall, or not Caleb Williams. Spencer Rattler was preseason number 1 overall player in the mock drafts going into that 2021 season when Caleb Williams was a freshman. Nothing had failed at Oklahoma necessarily. And Rattler finished that 2020 season really, really well. He smacked Florida, obviously, in the bowl game. So I don't know that one's fair either. And when he follows him to USC, it's kind of like, well, this is like what we talk about with the Hackenberg thing. It's like you're trying to be the start and rebuild a program. So I don't even know if that one's fair. Go back and look at the quarterback class of 2019. if you want a fun little roller coaster of emotions with some of the guys that are sandwiched in between others, got Ryan Helinski sandwiched in there.
Oh, yeah.
Like it gets weird. It gets weird in a hurry with that 2019 class, which also includes Bo Nix, obviously. So again, like not to hate on it, it's just really tough to find anything that's kind of similar, because
You're right.
we could piece a couple of things together, but you got to remember the circumstances going into it. And that's why I want to talk about this now, is because we know what we're saying about Billy Napier in Florida now, and how this is all being viewed, on the heels of the SEC scheduling release and all those different things. So it's even like, I was trying to think, the ideal path for success. People always say like, oh, well, a true freshman can have success in college football. True. Agreed. 100%. Trevor Lawrence had success as a true freshman in college football, won a national championship. Even he was sharing duties with Kelly Bryant in that first month before he eventually took over the starting job. If Florida had won 8, 9 games this year, you could probably play around with something like that if you're Billy Napier. And it was really back and forth with how those guys were trading series. You can go back and watch that A&M game that they played in College Station in 2018 and kind of look at the rotation. It was I thought it was pretty clear by the end of that day that Trevor Lawrence was better than Kelly Bryant. Not really a bold statement, but better than the program, Kelly Bryant as well. But what you can't have, you just absolutely can't have if you're Billy Napier, is a 3-2 start wherein you have someone making true freshman mistakes. That is the worst case scenario for you in this spot.
Well, someone's going to be making true freshman mistakes in Florida. Now, will that be a quarterback? That's the question. But the DBs will be making true freshman mistakes. I'm here to tell you right now.
a lot of true freshmen that it looks like are going to be playing for this Florida team, or maybe even second year guys as well. Underclassmen galore. After it felt like that's what we were talking about all this year as well. It's like, I just don't think that Florida has the team around Lagway to overcome that. If that's the path that Billy says is like, I'm going to have like pretty close to split reps with these guys, that's still putting a lot of faith in the rest of your team. And this isn't 2017 Jake Fromm, who was handing the ball off to Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, DeAndre Swift. He's got Roquan Smith leading that defense that was just lights out that year to get Georgia to a national championship game. It's not 2016 Jalen Hurts, who had the best team in America in the trenches, and also, by the way, a backfield of Bo Scarborough, Damian Harris, Josh Jacobs. Like this isn't that. This is 2024 Florida, who was just trying to have a winning season again and doing it against the most daunting schedule in college football. Doing that at a place that has won national championships in the 21st century, that has 3 division titles in the playoff era. It is not easy. It's just not going to be easy. Being a Florida quarterback is on the short list. I would probably have to come up with a real list and not just do it in the lazy way that others do it, in my opinion, in this profession sometimes. Florida's on the short list for the most pressure-packed jobs there are in college football. As high profile as it gets, being in that spot as a Florida quarterback, doesn't matter if your team is awful, it is always going to be scrutinized in a different sort of way. With a 5-star true freshman savior, whatever you want to call DJ Lagway, and a coach that is on the hot seat, we are going to see that cranked up to a new level. It's just going to be different. And the sense of urgency is different now than it was 5 years ago because of all the undergrad transfer restrictions that have been loosened. And because you could wake up a year from now, Florida fans, and you'd be like, crap, DJ Lagway is making money to go somewhere else. Like, that can very much happen, and it puts so much pressure on what they're trying to do in year one. I mean, you could even have a situation in theory, where let's say Florida is actually pretty good on offense and they're 8-4, something like that, but Lagway doesn't like the way that he's being used in the offense, and it's a Justin Fields, Georgia type situation where he's like, well, nope, I'm going to peace out. I'm going to hit the portal and make money and find an offense that better suits my skill set. I wouldn't bank on that. I don't think that's going to happen because Lagway committed to Napier, and this is Mertz's last season of eligibility. But I don't think you could rule anything out when it comes to NIL. I really don't. That's still on the table. It would be a lot more fun if DJ Lagway was just awesome. It really would be. I'll say that. I don't get any more or less money to do this job if Lagway barely plays, okay? Like, if that happens and Billy gets fired and Lagway hits the portal, my life is not changing. So I'm admitting I'm trying to get my biases out there. But seeing someone step in this spot with as steep of an uphill climb and watching him reach to the top of that mountain, whatever that may be for Florida, would be incredibly entertaining. And it'd be well earned if he could do that. So you know what? I am here for the DJ Lagway era at Florida. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, same. I'm right there with you. Like, I just want to watch that dude play football, and I think you hit on the NIL part of it, which is a huge deal. And part of it sets up for why it's not as risky to be in this very nuanced situation, which is that if you go commit to a program before the portal, you got to do a lot of stuff to get out of there if Billy Napier gets fired. Whereas now it's like, I can honor my commitment and be a stand-up guy for a year. And if Billy doesn't hold up his part of it, or if he gets fired, even if I like him, I'm out of here because my commitment was to that man right there. And I held up my end of the bargain and no one would fault me for it. Like, no Florida fan, if they win 5-6 games and Billy Napier gets fired, no Florida fan would go, damn, Lagway's leaving. What a traitor. They'd go, all right, you gave us a shot, you tried it out. And so the PR, like in the PR part of it is, at least the kid gave it a shot. At least we didn't say what if. And yeah, I mean, as far as the Lagway stuff, you guys, I was actually just talking to my mom about this. Something I've said on here a ton is, if you have, these guys in the program that you're going to say, they're from the old admin, they're losers, whatever, get the losers out of there, let the young guys play. And I'm not necessarily calling Graham Mertz a loser, but he is a game manager. Last time we talked, with Cam Newton's thing where he said there's a game manager and there's a game changer. DJ Lagway, just based on what I've seen on tape, is probably going to be a game changer. Maybe not next year, but maybe just the year after that.
Looks like it. Yeah, you're not getting game manager tags if you're, a 5-star guy. Like, that's just not supposed to be. That's not supposed to be the billing coming in. Yeah.
100%. And, he doesn't even profile as like a, Jake Fromm style guy where it's like, yeah, you make some of the throws, you can hit those intermediate passes, but you're going to take care of the football. He's going to slang that thing. And that's kind of a little bit scary. But, I mean, for a guy like Billy Napier who's going to go forward on 4th and 15, on his side of the field, maybe that stuff doesn't scare him as much. Honestly, this is a perfect quarterback for him because they're both send it mentality guys. They go forward and 4th down. They're be bold and brash, let it sling. And that's what they've missed out on is talent at the quarterback position. Now, they had Anthony Richardson. That was talent, right? But he couldn't, whatever happened with Anthony Richardson, he was not getting developed at Florida. Not going to blame him totally. But point being, I'm of the mentality that you have to sell a little bit of that hopium. If Florida is struggling, and we've already talked about this with Florida's schedule, I said, get those young guys ready because they're going to be needed down the stretch. No matter how you slice it, those guys, somebody will get hurt, somebody will get tired, somebody will not be playing, and young guys are going to have to step up just because that roster is so thin. So if you're already prepared to do that on defense, if you're already prepared to do that on the offensive line where they're getting some of these guys, well, then I would just lean all the way into it and say, hey, let's, like, if Mertz isn't really like the guy, if Mertz hasn't taken a clear step this offseason and he's still the guy we've seen this whole time, let's at least do a little bit of the Anthony Richardson, get him out there and say, look, give me another year. I'll get this guy right. This guy loves me. If you lose me, you lose this guy. And I think that could be enough for Billy because I would rather lose fun. You know what I'm saying? If you're going to lose fun. That's why I wasn't that, like, angry at LSU this year because it was fun the whole time. It was annoying that they wasted a Heisman, but it wasn't like, a losing season in 2014 where they couldn't move the ball. I would rather have Lagway out there and have 15 picks, but 20-something touchdowns, and every time he gets in, the DBs start backing off, right? Because when Mertz is in, those DBs are in the box. They're looking at Mertz kind of like, I know where you're going with this. It's going to be a hospital ball. It's going to be over the middle. I'm going to hit this guy in the hands. It's going to get jarred loose if I get my shoulder down right. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I think that fear that a guy like Lagway can put in the defense, you got to at least use that the way they use Steph's gravity and say, this guy's coming off the bench. You DBs need to back up because he doesn't care. He's going to be here or he's not, but you're not going to bench him because he's not playing,
I wonder what that leash looks like. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that Billy knows at this point. You're never bracing for your starting quarterback to struggle, but I wonder internally what it really looks like because, again, I always talk about how the vibe and how much that changed when you suffer that second loss. For Florida, the second loss this season, the way that it sets up, if you lose that second game before the first 7 is over, right? That is, oh boy, we're in for it. We are absolutely in for it. And so is it, hey, you get that second, like if that second loss happens, then that's when you turn to Lagway? Maybe. I don't know. It really depends on a lot of different factors. And he's going to have an opportunity now where he's getting there and he's got a chance to win over those guys, which that's the thing I worry about least. I think he's already looking like the guy that's going to command the locker room and do all those different things. And it's not to say that Mertz hasn't done that as well. It seems like everybody has kind of stood up for him, and he's taken ownership of that. I give him a lot of credit. I've already admitted that Mertz, even though he does run more of the proverbial game manager type offense, he is still a better player than I thought he was going to be, which is why I'm not sitting here saying, Billy, you must start Lagway week 1. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you can't have a decision to make by late September. And if it is, then how do you manage that? And how do you keep that guy trying to look like the best version of himself while also recognizing that it's still a wins and losses business. And that is what's going to define Billy Napier's time, especially in year 3.
And I want to say, gosh, this is such a good exercise because this is so unique. All right. Our boy Nico at Tennessee, what's his last name?
Iamaleava,
right?
That's not even close. You can
not
do
even
better
close.
Than that.
You know what? Like I said, when he plays, that's what I said with Tua. When he plays, I'll get his name. Uyunglele figured it out because he started playing. Anyway,
crushed it, Will. Look at that.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not going to learn your name if it's hard if you're not playing. That's my rule. So anyway, he was a guy who Heupel has just resurrected Tennessee football, right? So they didn't have to play him. Now, Heupel, if he was in a Butch Jones, Jeremy Pruitt situation, he's probably coming in. But a better situation to look at, like I said, is Sark. Because Sark, I mean, one of, if not his best win at the time he got Arch Manning was Billy Napier at UL, right? Like he had not done anything at that point. It was another Texas team that, they almost beat Alabama. But they couldn't move the ball against TCU. They're doing all this stuff. So point being, we thought, and fans and especially national guys are saying, let's get Arch in. So the best case scenario, and I do want to bring this up, is that Graham Mertz just balls. I mean, if you ask Billy Napier, what do you want to happen? He would say, I hope Graham Mertz balls. Because then he's only going to be there for a year. Lagway obviously is not promised a starting job, or we would have heard it by now. He would have looked into the camera and said, I'm coming here to start. We haven't heard that. And so knowing that Mertz is going to be the guy, what you'd want as Billy is to say, look how I developed Mertz after 2 years, and he might have that jump like a Jaden Daniels did, like a Bo Nix did, right, in year 2, where you go, okay, look what I did for this guy. Look, and that's honestly the dream if you're Florida, is to not really see DJ Lagway. Now, being practical people, we know that that's probably not going to be the case with this defense, because even a great Graham Mertz probably is not slinging that thing the way that, some of these guys were. But I just want to be clear, what Billy wants would be to develop Mertz, and more of a runway than he had with Richardson, and say, look, I am the QB whisperer. I am the QB developer. I can take Mertz from a guy we were all laughing at to, oh, maybe he'll get drafted day 3. Maybe he'll have a little cup of coffee in the NFL or whatever. And then now I got Lagway. So y'all better not fire me, because if you give me 2-3 years with Lagway, now I'm good. I want to say that because I don't want to be Mr. Oh, let's start him immediately. But if Graham Mertz goes out and proceeds to continue to be Graham Mertz, I've seen enough of that person. If we get 2-3 games in and he's still kind of not holding the offense back, but managing the games when the defense is blowing it open, then we got to make a change.
If they don't pass protect better, neither of those guys are going to have a chance.
Yep.
That's probably also the thing that I should have brought up here is, if Florida doesn't get a whole lot better, it's not going to matter what plays Billy's drawn up or his future offensive coordinator, if he's going to hire one. They need to pass protect better. They just do. They need more continuity on that offensive line. Who knows if they're going to be in the post-spring market, if they're going to base some of those evaluations on that. But no matter what, we've seen enough from Graham Mertz where even Florida fans who are saying that this guy's really good, you've seen enough of him to know you got to protect that guy, because if you don't, he's not going to make it happen for you. And with a true freshman in that spot, you don't want him to fall into some of those bad habits that we talked about with Bo Nix. And you don't want a guy that's drifting off to his right and all of a sudden the mechanics are an issue and he's sensing pressure that isn't really there. So look, the best version of DJ Lagway means that Billy Napier keeps his job. That's pretty cut and dry at this point. And I don't know if there is a whole lot of situations where we're going to look across college football and say that player is his future, and what he shows us this year is going to be synonymous with that coach's job security. But with Lagway, it just kind of feels like that at this point, barring, of course, Graham Mertz doing the new rage in college football, year 5 starter, balls out. Who knows?
Yep. And I will say this too, really quick. Like, one thing that does make this different is something we've seen a heck of a lot. Heck, we've seen Bobby Petrino do this at 2 different places now, is how hard it is to find coaches to go uproot their families when your head coach is on the hot seat, right? And we saw that with LSU. I always talk about, like, when I'm picking on a team, I like to go to LSU. That's a lot of the reason why I talk about them so much. But if you look at 2021, when everybody kind of knew Coach O was on the way out, could not find coordinators at LSU.
Yep.
If you're Florida and your options are yourself or Joe Sixpack at East West State, I would just keep yourself at that point and be like, look, DJ, I got you. I'm not gonna take away. I can promise you X, Y, and Z. If you can't go get that guy who really will make a difference, it's better to just die on your sword and let it be your offense and have you at the keys at this point, right? After all the coaching hires have been made, after signing day, all that, than to go, yeah, let me just go grab the quarterbacks coach from the Chargers or whatever. It's like, that doesn't work. I'm here to tell you right now. But those are the options you're looking at, because nobody is going to go take an OC job when they see the schedule. They see Billy Napier's record. They see I'm coming into a quarterback controversy. So I would honestly say, if you're Billy, dude, at this point, you might just be the OC and live or die, sink or swim.
I would hate that. I would hate that in so many ways, because it's not just about the offense. Not just about the offense. I know we've talked about this before, and Hayes and I got into this as well. Just about all the different CEO things that you have to worry about, and that you have to deal with. And when you're a team that has so many mental mistakes in a season, I don't care if your offense is really good. As a head coach, you are coming short in other very key areas that you cannot afford to come short in.
Yep.
And that to me is why that would push me to want to hire an OC. But obviously I'm looking at this on the outside and not Billy Napier digging my heels in.
This is fascinating. This is I'm glad you brought it, because there are so many parts of it. Yeah, it's like, harder to get recruits, harder to get coaches, harder to even possibly get transfers. But once that momentum, it's all a PR business, right? Like when Billy Napier was hired, it was everybody. It was Corey Raymond. It was all the 5-stars. It was Shamar. It was, guys who were trying to flip at the last second. It was, if we had more time. And so, yeah, I think that just goes to show he's not a fundamentally different person or coach, but the tides have just kind of changed. And it's to look at a guy and be certain on one end and then be certain on the other end the way that we are. It's just so crazy, because he hasn't shown anything but what he's been his whole career, which is a brash guy, trusts himself a little bit too much. So yeah, I'm fascinated. This could be the beginning of the resurgence of Florida football, or it could be the end of the Billy Napier tenure of Florida football. That's it,
The resurgence or the last stand, one of those two things.
Yeah,
that's what it feels like for Billy. But very, very interesting, something we'll talk about a lot throughout the offseason. All right, let's kick it to Brett Merriman. You might know that name from Barstool a few years back. Former office manager Brett, as some might remember him, but also a huge Ole Miss fan, listener to the show, someone who just loves college football. And Chip Kelly may or may not have read Brett's proposal from a couple of months ago on how to fix the sport and apply it to that rant that went super, super viral over the weekend. So great conversation with him. Let's kick it to Brett. Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Brett Merriman of Watch Media. Brett, every once in a while, I'll hear something that, a coach will say, or maybe I'll hear something on a broadcast, and I'll do the Leonardo DiCaprio gif where I'm like, I'm pretty sure that that person, whoever said that, got that from something that I said or wrote. When you heard Chip Kelly's rant on fixing college football, how convinced were you that he read your article from October outlining a lot of those same points?
Connor, it was the reason I reached out to you. Basically, I was dumbfounded. I was very excited that Chip had perused my material. No, all kidding aside, it was fun to see a coach kind of putting out in the universe what I had put on paper a couple months ago back in October.
I imagine you were probably doing the same exact thing, though. Like you're getting up from your couch, you're like, wait a minute, no. This is a lot of what I've already laid out. Because if you Google, I fixed college football, you can read all this. So anybody that wants to kind of follow along with some of the things that we'll dig into, the first line in there, though, is you saying, don't complain about a problem without providing a solution. I read that and I did the Leonardo DiCaprio meme, because I say all the time, don't present a problem without providing a solution. So we're just back and forth like, look, this is what we need. We need collective minds getting together and trying to figure out some sort of these solutions, and understanding that this is something that you put together over the course of a week. There are a lot of different things that would have to happen in order for obviously this world to exist. But let's dig into it. One of the parts that I think is really interesting, the National College Football Association that operates essentially with only football interests, much like the college football playoff. How do you convince commissioners, ADs, and presidents to want to give up power and sign on for something like that?
Yeah, that's it. I kind of start the article too with a bunch of assumptions. One of them being that ADs and administrators sort of have to accept this sight unseen. I think you almost need to strong arm at some point. You need an organization that functions as sort of a federal college football association, which I kind of built into the NCFA there. And then you have to carrot and stick with money and say, basically, okay, if we're going to rip up this TV contract and your conference is no longer benefiting financially from this, there has to be something else following up immediately. So one of the creative ways that kind of get around that is basically saying, all right, well, if you're an SEC official now, you kind of get first dibs at the Southern Conference, being a Southern Conference official. Sort of the Pac-12 ends up getting squeezed out there, but we kind of see that happening anyway. But yeah, it's one of those things that it's not a perfect system, but I kind of envision conference officials sort of moving into new positions under a federally run central entity.
And I think you could cover the cost of that with a new TV contract, right? I mean, like that's kind of the thing, the answer to all the money questions, because we got to this place because of money. So money has to be part of the solution, and giving that money up for the SEC and the Big Ten right now is the part that is so tough to get past, because they would need to get more money with any sort of collective contract. The thing that Chip Kelly also talked about as well, of like, hey, if everybody gets on board and we all can approach this like the NFL, then they will actually make more money by doing it this way. If you kind of break it down with some of the other media sponsors, the way that you could even have the sponsored National College Football Playoff Association that's presented by Amazon or whatever it may be. Like, how would you kind of be able, like, to be able, what's the best negotiating power for that? The collective college football as a whole, a sport that is felt so regional, but in this sense, you'd be selling it nationally to try and say, this is why this contract would benefit all these different TV networks.
Exactly. I mean, you're creating NFL light in essence, and basically saying that the product as a whole is going to be so much stronger than a regionally sort of greedy lattice of conferences as it functions today. So if you make something that's sort of nationally governed, those contracts can be divvied out conference by conference. Obviously, you're going to have brands that are, more powerful, maybe in the South and the Big Ten, or I call it the Northern Conference in this case. So you just you leverage that collective power against the streaming services, against the networks, against everybody, so that you do bring a financial reward that ends up being more than even something you could have today. So I sort of envision, college football is X plus X plus X, right now. But if you were to take the sum of the parts would be, the sum of the whole would be greater than the sum of the parts in this essence, basically, because you're taking the product as it is, adding everything else in underneath, whether that's the media sponsorships from like kind of a conference social side of things, or the product on the field, or the naming rights to XYZ Bowl that I kind of envision. But yeah, you end up with a system where the entire payout has to be larger than what it is currently, and that's what I think this does.
The 4 regional super conferences, for travel purposes, makes a lot of sense. And you kind of look at it the way that you have this broken down on the map. You're like, yeah, okay, that all would be way better. And if these schools, if UCLA and USC and Oregon, Washington, if they're not traveling to Piscataway, New Jersey, yeah, like everybody I think has kind of looked at that going, we've messed up at some point. And your regional conferences, these super conferences with 16 teams, would correct that. My only issue is that you put my alma mater as a tier 2 program, Indiana. So explain, because like essentially what you're doing is relegating schools like Indiana, Minnesota, Northwestern, Vandy, Wake Forest, others to tier 2, and saying that you wouldn't get a part of that tier 1, which relegation for college football has been kind of thrown out with the Super League and stuff, but it kind of explained the logic that would go into that.
Yeah, so it's because I don't like your team specifically. And if your team is tier 2, it's absolutely because I just have a personal vendetta. No, it's sort of it would come down to rankings and sort of a combined brand awareness play. That would be something where you have to, if you're going to tier this off, and 64 sort of makes sense for that, because it's kind of where you get a pretty even talent split, and then you have to provide some sort of way in and some sort of way out, and that's what I do, saying there's a radical system of relegation and promotion. And it's, if you win your tier conference, or you lose it for that matter, you have basically the opportunity to play for your life and play for that next level of money. And if you win, you move on, obviously, and you go into this next tier. And if you lose, and I think I have like a Duke, for example, not to throw the Blue Devils under the bus, but if they came in last and they lost their sort of their toilet bowl game, if you will, they dropped down. And I think that's a system that incentivized people to, like, okay, if we were put in tier 2 to begin with, if we're Minnesota or Indiana, we still have an opportunity to get there. It's not going to be easy, but to access that higher salary cap, the higher money disbursements, et cetera, we now have an incentive to still, put money into college football so that we can eventually maybe make it back to a tier 1 system. And also I kind of think I had too is like, you can still have a tier 2 national champion. It would basically be like a group of 5 national champion today, which I know has been thrown around as well. So it provides a couple different incentives, whether it's winning or financially. And it's just something that would be a tough pill to swallow for, I think, 64 plus ADs out there pretty immediately.
Yeah, that would be a really tough sell to be like, wait, what do you mean we're starting at tier 2? Like we've made this amount of money, we've been able to compete for this national championship, and then you tell us that we actually have to work our way back into the tier 1. That'd be really tough. And I always say, to realignment in the way that this has happened with TV contracts, it's not as simple as, oh, team X wins 10 games, therefore this is why they want to go into this conference. They want these TV contracts in place so that it does not necessarily because they think they can win a national championship, but because they want to be safe when they don't. And that, I think, is the floor that so many of these programs have turned to, and why in Indiana, Northwestern, they use these contracts to fund all of these other athletic programs within the university. So that'd be the toughest thing. And you'd be obviously, like, just from a legal standpoint, the amount of things that you'd have to work through, from like a lawsuit, lawyers that would be involved. That brings me to my next question. I'm not sure, I might have missed this part in there. How would you crack the grant of rights deal in the ACC to get that voided? Because that could be the holdup in this entire thing, with that lasting through 2036.
I think there's one sort of major assumption, is that if we're doing this, you are tearing up existing contracts that, however ironclad they may currently be, and basically saying, if we tear this up, we're buying out this contract. I don't know where you're getting this money from to do this. Obviously, it's a pie in the sky scenario to begin with, but you're going to have to rip something that's pretty ironclad up. And in the case of the ACC, ideally you end up with competitive nature in the future with either the Northern or Southern Conference. In that case, that balances it out in the long run. But short-sightedness, I think, is one of those features, not bugs, of college football, and we've seen that lately.
Right, you just described the dream scenario for the ACC. This contract, just rip it up. Don't worry about it. Just rip it up.
Yeah, who cares?
Yeah,
all these lawyers, priced, right?
Yeah, these lawyers that have spent thousands and thousands of hours looking for every possible loophole in the grant of rights deal, they're told, hey, this guy's got a solution, and literally all we have to do is just rip up this contract. It's good. It's good. I love it, man.
Really make quick work of it. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that I think if you provide enough of an incentive or enough of a legal scenario where you can do something like that, I mean, you're creating competition for other teams. Like, I don't think Bama would be super happy about that, or even like in Ohio State, because now you have a Boston College team that was once number 2 in the nation, Connor, back in the Matt Ryan days. You are creating, in essence, more competition. But I think there's people that love that. There's people that hate that. There's people that say, well, if we're going to have a non-con against, Michigan's playing UCLA or somebody like that, or USC, if we're going to schedule non-con like that, then why are we adding more competition? And that's basically this sort of the scheduling piece of this scenario fixes that as well.
Yeah, because it needs to be a little bit more of there needs to be more governance over teams playing specific regions of the country and having some sort of rotating thing. That's something that I would like to see taken from the NFL, is like this rotating out of conference deal. But what you have described for the playoff is also really intriguing, because it actually fuels competition within the conferences that are pushed towards the postseason. So that was probably a confusing way for me to describe it, but you would still have a 4-team playoff organized by the National College Football Association, the NCFA, which just sounds like a very real acronym already. I'm like convinced that's already there. But
I may have tried the trademark on that one.
Yeah, like I don't blame you. That's legit. I think you could just start calling things that, and nobody would necessarily push back. But you would essentially have a 6-team playoff among each of these super conferences. So a 6-team playoff involving each of these 16-team regional conferences, wherein the top 2 seeds within that would get a bye, and then that would be essentially how you would play out a conference championship. The winner of these 4 super conferences, these regional super conferences, would play for a college football playoff national championship after an 11-game regular season. That's a creative solution to the playoff that I actually really like, which would kind of combine the best of both worlds, in my opinion.
Exactly, and that's kind of the idea: is get more teams involved. So if you are an Ole Miss, or if you are sort of a down year, or maybe even a Purdue, for example, you can get in that top 6 within your conference. And then anything can happen, right? And the 11-game regular season, everybody's like, oh, we have to play 12. And you are going to play a guaranteed 12 games. In this system, you either make the playoffs or you sort of play your equal seed where you ended up in a traditional bowl game. And you also have a preseason game in this system that doesn't count towards your record. So you are still getting revenue from that game. You can still sign a TV contract to broadcast that game. And maybe that's an opportunity, like I mentioned, kind of to rest your guys and figure out position battles, because the NFL has a preseason for a reason. I know people don't necessarily love it as from a player standpoint, but it would help things be figured out. So it just kind of incentivizes, 24 teams make the playoffs in this scenario versus a traditional 12. And that's sort of more or less the top third of the league. And if you play as well as you need to get into to be in the top third of the tier 1 of college football, I think you should have a shot. The buys protect the regular season for the first and second teams, and then you basically play. Then it becomes Omaha, right? You're super regional, and then you go to a Final Four, more or less.
That'd be entertaining. You could sell the crap out of that. I mean, you really could. That would be, and especially too now that we've gotten away from the original stance that the NCAA had of, oh, well, you can't schedule these games during finals. It's like, well, next year we're going to have college football playoff games on December 20th. So miss me with that entire argument that they used to once make. It doesn't make sense anymore. You would think all of this that you've outlined here, which again, go check it out, Watch Media. I mean, if you Google I Fix College Football, again, you can find this. But you would think that you personally are some Fresno State fan or something like that, or you're just trying to draw up different ways, or maybe like a lower end of the tier 1 type school. But you're in a spot as an Ole Miss fan where you might actually be the fan base that could benefit the most from the 12-team playoff in the future of what college football looks like. You kind of thought about that? There's a little bit of irony in what you're probably about to experience from that side of the spectrum.
Oh, of course. And basically it's giving those teams a chance, giving them an opportunity, which everybody has an opportunity, right? It's just don't lose. Except
just win all your games.
Except for one very specific situation that might have happened this year. Yeah. But it gives, like, as an Ole Miss fan, right? We as a team would be in the playoff this year, and it's such a cool opportunity, right, for that to exist. And this just gives more hope. And the hopium, Connor, is one of the most marketable things in the world. And so if you and I might not see dollar signs, but hopium is certainly seen as by his conference officials as dollar signs. So you're just providing more opportunities to get into the dance. And I think we see that with the March Madness tournament. And that's the one thing the NCAA, I think, does a pretty good job with as a federally or kind of a nationally governed body. But this just kind of plays off of that in a way. And yeah, you're right. You're giving a Fresno State fan base a chance. You're giving a Purdue or a Maryland fan base a chance. And I think that's something that was certainly where my heart was in this. But then Ole Miss goes on the run that they do, and you say, well, now we're one of the big dogs, and maybe we don't need to expand this anymore.
Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's the excitement level for Ole Miss fans, knowing what we've just talked about here? The playoff is indeed expanding. As of right now, they have not taken on your proposal and applied it to all elements of this sport, but TBD on that. Just what's it like as an Ole Miss fan, knowing that Lane has dominated the portal in ways that I don't think anybody has to this point, and feeling like this team next year, with the way that it sets up, not having to play Bama, like even in an expanded, more difficult SEC, this could be a really ideal time to be an Ole Miss fan.
Yeah, the excitement level's a 12. I mean, whatever is higher than 10, it's going to be a trendy pick by everybody. Maybe not you giving them 6 wins again, Connor. I don't know if that's going to be the case.
That was rough. That was rough.
But no, it's really what Lane did, and I think this is he called it. He basically a year and a half ago says, "Well, we're the small ballers. We can't do this. We can't do that. We don't have." He spoke it into existence from an Ole Miss standpoint, where people either get on board or we're going to fall apart. We're going to be like some other programs that haven't embraced NIL, that haven't embraced the portal. And they're going backwards. And Ole Miss decided very early on to get not only people who are donating $21 a month to the Grove Collective and getting a mass of them, but also getting the big guys on board. And Ole Miss obviously doesn't have as many as a Georgia or a Bama or an A&M. And that's kind of fine in this world, as long as you're using your NIL correctly and efficiently, I think is the thing. It's sort of a modern day Moneyball down there in Oxford. But what they've done a really good job with is saying, okay, we still need to get high school guys in the door. And they've gotten some 4-stars, they've gotten some JUCO guys, that like a Deion Smith, who started at LSU, went to JUCO, now he's at Ole Miss. They're really efficient with that spend, because they're saying, okay, well, we can't have a class of 5-stars. We can't have 10 guys because half of them are going to transfer anyway. We're going to pay them to not play necessarily. Lane's not a big freshman getting on the field guy. Except in very rare cases like a Quinshon Judkins. And so they say, we're going to go get established people out of the portal, and we're going to spend, they might be costly. They might be $1 million defensive linemen perhaps, but we're going to do it after they've proven themselves and not necessarily coming out of high school, but still kind of having a great balance. But Lane was so early on it, and so I think smart with getting everybody on board and pulling the rope in the same direction from a collective standpoint, from an administration standpoint, coaching and roster management standpoint. And then you bring in, Pete Golden, who I think is sort of one of the secrets in all of this. And he mentioned yesterday that game in Georgia was such a wake-up call. When you get kicked in the teeth and punched in the mouth, and Pete just didn't have the size. They didn't have the length. If somebody has 100 pounds on you and leans on you for 4 hours, you're going to break by the middle of the first half, which is exactly what happened. So Pete said, we need to build a defense, and that's what Lane's doing, and a couple fun offensive prospects as well, like a Juice Wells or a Deion Smith coming in. But it's been a really fun way to watch portal development and roster development in the case of Ole Miss.
It's fascinating. It really is. The point that you brought up about saying, okay, why are we going to spend our money on this underclassman, this freshman, this sophomore that may or may not play? Why not would we instead go look at somebody that's established, that we have a little bit more realistic tape on, that isn't as much of a risk? You can't do it entirely based on that, because obviously you still got to develop the in-state guys. You can't burn those bridges in that way. But Lane has found this very specific balance, and it is hard. But what he is trying to do, in my opinion, is totally different than what Deion Sanders was trying to do last year at Colorado, right? Like, what Lane is essentially saying is, look, I know what we're up against. We're not going to burn those high school bridges. They still had, 6 blue chip recruits or 5 blue chip recruits at the high school level, and they're still trying to develop in that way. But getting that opportunity and doing it not with we're going to have 50 guys from the portal or something like that. You're not telling your guys, hey, you're not going to have a spot on this team. It is really, really fascinating. I do wonder if we're going to get to a place where Ole Miss is talked about entirely different in the latter half of the 2020s. Like, how do you feel that Ole Miss is going to be talked about moving forward? Because probably as an Ole Miss fan in the 2010s, very different conversations when someone says who's your team? And you go oh yeah, Ole Miss, we're going through it right now. Like, how has that changed for you?
Yeah, it's funny. It's sort of in a year really has gone from the upstart, kind of team that has been getting kicked in for the last couple of years, whether it's Violation, with Hugh Freeze, et cetera. But you look back to a 2013 class and say, okay, Ole Miss has its, at some point it was putting up the money or the maybe the benefits, right, to get guys like Tim Dichie in the door. But it's kind of this roller coaster where, okay, where the expectations are still low, and it's still Kiffin, and he hasn't won anything. And then this hyper sort of pedal to the metal, everybody's coming back. You'll have Dart, Judkins, Trey Harris, Caden Priestcorn, et cetera, coming back, building a defense, and all of a sudden it's hype now, and there's expectations. And you see teams like, remember the 2011 Philadelphia Eagles signed every free agent in the book, and Nnamdi Asomugha, and here we go, we're going to have this super team, and 8-8 or something like that. So it's going to be the first time that Ole Miss is playing with real expectations, like not just winning season expectations, not just 8 or 9 wins, but there are college football playoff expectations, especially in the expanded world. And it's been fun to see from a media standpoint. You kind of become a media darling. But those internal expectations are going to be on them for the first time, and it's going to be interesting to see how they respond to that. But Lane talks about culture one guys all the time, guys that have been there, that have built this thing, and the transfer portal becomes less of a mercenary kind of tactic. It's more, get a guy in who's going to buy in. One of your guys, JJPDs, for example, comes back for another year, and he was the first domino, basically saying, hey, we're either going to go off and sow our oats in the NFL, or we're going to give this one more try. And when you have a leader in the locker room like JJ or Jackson, I think we'll expect an announcement from here in the relatively near future to come back. It just makes all the sense in the world, and it's fun to see the media sort of, okay, we're on board with Ole Miss now. We're not just a doormat, and then you look at a team like Florida who's going the opposite direction, not to throw the Gators under the bus. But it's funny to see the media just, you kind of have these arguments and these darlings that come and go, but it's certainly better to be in a darling position than not.
And being the ultimate good vibes team, which Ole Miss was after 2020, they will be the ultimate good vibes team this offseason. I'm putting my stamp on it right now. Barring something crazy, Judkins injury, something like that. I mean, like something drastic, Judkins portal, something stunning that just throws everybody for a loop. It's going to be really hard to take that title away from them. I went back and read an old column that I wrote, not the 6-6 prediction that Lane called out. Didn't want to go back and read that, wherein I definitely predicted them to lose to Vandy. I went back and I read the column I wrote after the Matt Luke firing, and I kind of cautioned Ole Miss fans, be careful what you wish for. I remember reading the story from Nick Suss about the mutiny that was happening within that program after Matt Luke got the vote of confidence. Keith Carter, who's just signed on to become the AD, and gives him this vote of confidence, and all of a sudden he's told, like, actually you don't have a job, and players are just livid. I'm thinking to myself, who's Ole Miss think they're going to get? Like, what are they doing here? Who's going to get them out of this rut and get everybody back on board? And Lane has stabilized it in ways that I couldn't have ever dreamed of. What do you remember about that juncture? Because that feels like such an important fork in the road, and it couldn't have really ended up a whole lot better than where it's ended up, 3-4 years later.
Yeah, I think it was, we're going to take a swing, and you kind of need to at that point. Keith Carter comes in, sort of wants to put a stamp on things. We're not going to be safe anymore. We're not necessarily going to be a program guy like a Luke family, who's been with Ole Miss forever, and said, we're going to see if we cannot function in this new era of college football, knowing what was coming down the pike at that point. And Lane ends up being the perfect guy to do it. Sort of rehabs, obviously, at FAU. And here we go. We're going to take a swing with SEC resources. Obviously, a couple of years of winning, and Lane is a hot commodity for the Auburn job, et cetera. But at that point, it was, well, it can't get any worse. And we're going to be at, if 7 wins is the expectation, we can hire Connor O'Gara to coach the team, because you're going to have that ability year in, year out with it. Just the innate, kind of the late talent you have in Mississippi and Alabama, et cetera. But that's not the expectation anymore for Keith Carter. And he said, when Lane comes in, the best 4 and 5 team in the country in 2020, we have a blast with the COVID year, but all of a sudden you see the program building, right? It's less about kind of churning talent through. It's less about guys coming in, and then now there's a program. Now there's a culture. Now there's a social media presence. Come to the SIP, transfer to the SIP. You get people on board from all facets of life. It's the sponsors like a Real Tree, for example. It's the administration with Keith Carter and Lane giving him the ability to do kind of whatever he wants from a program standpoint. Facilities upgrades that were much needed. So Lane comes in and says, if you want to win, we're going to do it my way. If you want to be 7 and 5 every year, keep doing it your way. And that was the decision that was made, kind of in 2019, 2020. And we've seen the benefits reaped from that tremendously.
I wonder how many jobs there are that would open up that would make you say, oh boy, we're going to have to sweat this out. That list it is smaller than what we thought a few years ago for sure. I mean, we've seen Auburn, we've seen A&M, the Miami thing that I remember a couple years ago was like, oh, is Lane going to leave from Miami? Like that list can't be that long anymore. What's your take on that? Like how many jobs do you think could open up where you'd be legitimately nervous that Lane could leave for?
Yeah, I mean, A&M did it this year. When that job opened up, Lane's on the short list, and he should be, right? Like that's a badge of honor for a program. So that made me nervous. But there are probably 5. I mean, it's you look at the Bama job, obviously. You go for like a Georgia or a Texas. Those are sort of the 3 major ones, and I would put LSU in that category as well. Everybody says, well, if Florida opens up or Auburn opens up again, those are less, in this new world, less attractive because all of a sudden the 12-team playoff is your ticket in. You don't need to be a top 4 team with the A&M type resources to compete year in, year out. You can get to a playoff by winning 10 games and losing to an Alabama or losing to a Georgia or losing to a Texas or Oklahoma in this situation. So, yeah, it's one of those things where I don't think I'm nervous about anything at this point. And if you're a Mizzou fan and you're scared that Drink's going to go somewhere, or you're an Ole Miss fan and scared that Lane's going to go somewhere, I think it's one of those things where we're kind of past that at this point. So very few jobs, but a Bama opens up or a Georgia opens up, I am certainly nervous in that case.
Yeah, I'd put it even less than 5. I really would at this point. I think it's like 3. I really do, because I mean LSU opened with Brian Kelly like that.
Sure.
And it was a big splashy addition. Obviously, Lane had only been there for 2 years, but still, it's one of those things that I'm kind of looking at now, going, man, if you had taken the over on whatever that projection was when he was hired, and if you had just said like, yeah, I think Lane will be here more than 3 years, I do, you would have probably been in the minority at the time, and it's in a different world. We were saying the same thing about PJ Fleck in Minnesota. Oh God, he's just going to use that as a stepping stone job, and he's going to get a bigger. It's like PJ Fleck is still at Minnesota after all these years, and it could be a similar situation where, as you bring up, Lane wants to see how this plays out with the 12-team playoff, see how your roster stacks up. Who knows? Maybe we're going to look up, and he's in year 8 at Ole Miss, and it kind of goes against everybody's predictions when he first came on board. Do you have a Peach Bowl prediction for how it's going to shake out against Penn State?
I think it's going to be, I can't wait to play because Penn State sort of feels like the Ole Miss of the Big Ten, right? Can't beat Michigan, can't beat Ohio State, but sort of firmly in third. And that's where Ole Miss feels right now. Maybe not firmly. LSU fans are yelling at their computer right now or their headphones. But I think Ole Miss wins a sloppy game. And I think Penn State's defense is really good. I think Penn State's offense is questionable. I think Ole Miss's offense is really good, and their defense is questionable. So it's going to be the battle of kind of sloppy play in my mind. So I'm going to say Ole Miss 21-17 and kind of a gross game, but a fun game.
Lane doesn't win a whole lot of gross games. That's kind of atypical.
And he doesn't win gross games, but he wins games that just kind of cocky ego games that, especially this year, he comes down to a final drive or something like that. Maybe a Jackson Dart face mask away from beating Bama last year. I don't know, but we'll see. I'm very excited to play that game. And I know Penn State has some guys opting out. Ole Miss seems to be, I think, knock on wood here, everybody seems to be playing. So it'll be a fun game. It's going to be cool to see them on a big stage like the Peach Bowl and have a chance to go win 11 games for the first time in program history.
Tell you what, if it's a 4-point game at the end and I got to bet on James Franklin or Lane, I'm not betting on James Franklin. Let's just say that. He's going to find a way to figure it out. Right.
There you go.
Yeah, this has been great, man. Really, really interesting stuff. I recommend everyone go check it out. It's the plan to fix college football. We'll do this again soon, maybe in the midst of Ole Miss being the ultimate good vibes team this offseason.
There we go. Connor, appreciate you having me on. If anybody wants to check it out, like Connor said, Fixing College Football, leave your comments. I'd love to hear holes poked in the argument, etc. So really looking forward to being back on, and thanks for having me.
'Twas the night before Christmas when all through the SEC, not a team was stirring, not even the coach of Mississippi. The final year of college football as we know it had nearly passed. Plenty still hoped that the best was saved for last. Non-conference play was supposed to be the SEC's demise. A playoff without the SEC, or perhaps the ultimate surprise. Florida State was told that the games no longer mattered. Alabama moved on as FSU's playoff dreams shattered. But 2023 was about much more than the CFP. We had storylines aplenty in the mighty SEC. Georgia set forth on a path of college football history. It worked through slow starts that were a bit of a mystery. Year 2 proved to be eventful for BK and Billy. Both disappointed, but at least Jaden's numbers were silly. He lit up scoreboards en route to the Heisman, but moving Perkins around was not the move of Wiseman. Florida started with hope, but collapsed down the stretch. Mistakes piled up that would make a strong stomach retch. At least it didn't pay a coach to go away. Texas A&M shouted as it loaded the cash-filled sleigh. Now Bobby, now Coley, now Durkin and Jimbo. On buyouts, on straight cash, on hiring Mike Elko. To the top of the world, to the top of the rankings. Now gig 'em, I say. Let's give Texas yearly spankings. The horns were up when it appeared the tide was down. Little did we know that Milroe and Reese would turn it around. Mark Stoops told fans that it was time to pony up. Excuses or not, he clearly wasn't sipping out of Mizzou's cup. The Tigers were no longer the team that made others snicker. They won week after week, with help from the thicker kicker. Some other Tigers showed promise, but had a different fate. That included losing a game and $1.7 million to New Mexico State. At least Auburn made a bowl game, while others did not. 5 SEC teams watched their postseason dreams rot. Beamer and Lee followed an alarming Year 3 trend, while Arnett and Pittman coached in the game that needed to end. Joe Milton claimed he would throw it like Uncle Rico, but instead, Tennessee fans were ready to move on to Nico. It definitely didn't feel like 98, and you could tell from the start. But going 8-4 is still better than having a 5-star heart. Neither the Vols, Rebs, or Dogs could silence the tide. Even the selection committee let the Texas loss slide. The dynasty was dead in the middle of September, but week after week, the GOAT made us remember. Curse words were said and blood vessels were popped. Turnovers were had, but Bama could not be stopped. Auburn grew restless as it began to toss and stew. Why did we sit back and only rush 2? Alabama slept peacefully with dreams of roses and glory. Another chapter awaited the Tide's 2023 story. But as Saban tried to move the press clippings out of sight, he awoke and shouted, "There'll be no rat poison tonight." Merry Christmas, everybody. Couple of quick housekeeping notes before we send you off on your way. The Betting the Bulls podcast, those episodes, if you subscribe to this show, which you definitely should, you probably already seen it in your feed. We have done 2 episodes. The most recent episode that we did was on the 4 non-playoff New Year's 6 bowl episodes. A lot of great gambling advice from not just me. Definitely not just me. Marler crushed it with all things gambling, and Bob Winkle. Those 2 guys know their stuff a lot. But we just talked about a lot of different things. If you are getting in on the action at all, great listen to be able to figure out what exactly you want to root for in some of these games throughout the postseason here. So those bonus episodes once a week. We are still going to have all of our normal episodes up, but there will be a little bit of a tweak on that, because if you've looked at the calendar, the next 3 Mondays are atypical. We've got, I guess next 2 Mondays are atypical. 3 if you include the national championship, because we've got Christmas coming up on a Monday, New Year's Day is a Monday, and then the national championship is on a Monday. So for the sake of our recording purposes, guess what? We are not going to be recording on Mondays. We will instead be recording on Tuesdays and on Thursdays as well. So we will normally have pods that are showing up in your feed on Friday mornings, and then on the pods that we record on Tuesday, we're going to get some of them out a little bit earlier, but at the latest, they will be out on Wednesday morning. So the plan is we're going to preview the A&M Bowl game with the pod that we record next Tuesday. We're recording that on the 26th. That'll be out on the 27th. And then we're going to preview the other 8 SEC bowl games. So we're going to have a ton of stuff to be able to dig into. We've got great guests lined up next week as well. If you have not, leave us a 5-star review, subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every episode of the Saturday on Solid podcast which is presented by Texas Pete. Follow us on the app formerly known as Twitter, at the STS Pod, at SatDownSouth, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.